Hello guys, welcome to another one of my little videos. And in my last video I showed you how I prepare the assets for one of the shots for the Specialized v3.0, or in this case v2.5 and v3.0. And today I'm gonna show you how I use those assets that I prepared to make the final shot. So here you can see I'm in Nuke. And I already did this shot, and it was pretty complicated. It took several hours, so I didn't want to record everything. So I finished the shots, and now I'm just gonna walk you through how I did it. So what you're seeing here is the Blu-ray version, and that looks like this. Now, as you saw in the last video, I prepared the 35mm version. Which looks like this compared to the Blu-ray. It's very different. And as you can see here, really dirty, which is why I also prepared a cleaned up version and an even more cleaned up version. Here you can see the difference. So as you can see, Neat Video did a really good job cleaning this up, but at the same time it created some problems that need to be fixed. So I can't just do this cleaning and just use it as it is. As you can see here, this bird is practically gone. Plus, of course, the denoising is a little too heavy actually. And because the grain moves around and it removes the grain on a temporal basis, looking at frames looking forward and backward, it also creates this kind of warping sometimes when the grain is really heavy. So we'll have to deal with all those problems. And of course also here at the beginning of the shot, there's still a lot of these green specks left in. Okay, so this is Nuke. It's a completely different system than what I used on the previous versions of Despecialized. I use this program at work now, so I learned how to use it. And it's a lot more flexible than After Effects. Here you can see it's a fairly simple script that I'm using for this shot, and I'm gonna walk you through it. Most of you probably don't know how Nuke works, and this is not a tutorial, so I'm not going to explain it in detail, but hopefully you'll understand what I did, if not necessarily how I did it. So here we have the cleaned up 35mm version, and let me zoom in on this here. And as you can see, we have these read nodes. Each of these little squares or rectangles are called a node. So we have a read node, which is basically the way files are loaded into the program. So we have all these read nodes for each of our versions that we rendered out of Premiere in the last video. So here we have the Blu-ray, and I can highlight this read node, and if I press 1, down here we have a viewer node, which controls what shows up in our preview window here. So if I highlight the Blu-ray and press 1, that's gonna tell the viewer that input 1 is this read node. If I go to the 35mm and press 2, I'm now viewing the 35mm raw when I press 2. But now I can just press 1 and 2 and switch between them. I can do the same with this, press 3 go 1, 2, 3. Press 4 for this, and I can go through these like that. So now the first thing I did, I denoised this one because I'm gonna be using some elements of it, and it would really not match with this if it was this noisy. So I need to denoise it just a little bit, but I'm only doing spatial denoising here, so it doesn't erase anything. May lose a little bit of detail, but as you can see, not very much, and the noise is definitely reduced. These other two, there's no need to denoise because they're already denoised. Okay, next step is stabilization. When you look at this being played, you can see it moves around a lot. So what I did here is I chose a few points and tracked those. And from this tracker, I can export a transform stabilize node. And I use this node to stabilize the footage. And what I can do now is look into this node, and it shows me everything that happened between the read node and this node. In this case, it's just the stabilization. And as you can see, the image now doesn't move around nearly as much as before. There's some warping, which this method of stabilizing can't undo. And also, of course, there's separate element motion. So in this 35mm shot, you can clearly see where there is the matte painting and where there's a live action plate. You can see this because of the color difference, and after color grading, because the print is slightly faded red, so after color grading, the difference between the matte painting and the live action will be far less obvious. But here you can see it nicely, and you can see there's slightly different movement, or gate weave it's called. This is the movement of the film inside the gate is slightly different between the matte painting and the live action plate. So this of course stays because that was always there, but overall the frame is now much more stable. So if we switch back to the original, this is how much it shook before. And now with the stabilization, it's far more stable. Then I cloned this this stabilize node and used it for all these three sources, because the stabilization can be the same. I did the same for color correction, so I used this color correction node here. And again, cloned it so that the color correction is applied to all three versions. Here's the secondary color correction to get a little bit more detail out. It's very subtle. So this is before and after color correction. Now the next thing I did was create a clean plate. To do this, I used two different frames because I needed, like I said, there was still some dirt left in even in the most cleaned version, like here. So what I'm using here is a node called frame hold, which just tells the program to just hold one frame. So here I'm holding frame 13. No matter which frame I'm on inside the composition, it always shows frame 13. This one shows frame 15, As you can see, there's some dirt on frame 13 here. So I'm using this Roto Paint node to paint from this frame to this frame. And when I look into this Roto Paint node, you can see this dirt disappears because I painted it out. Oh look, there's still a little bit of dirt that I left in. So actually, let's paint this in now. So I'll use the reveal tool here, which reveals this input over this input, and just paint out that bit of dirt here and here as well. Now all these pieces of dirt are only painted out on frame 13. So the easiest way to deal with this is put another frame hold here, and now I'm holding this frame that is painted in. Then I'm gonna add some grain on top to give it some life. Okay, now that I've got this clean plate ready, I can go in here and start building my shot. So what I do here is I add all the live action areas over the clean plate. Here we have the masks that I used to do it. Okay, so the clean plate I'm only using basically for the matte painting that is static, which gets rid of the warping, gets rid of any remaining pieces of dirt on the background, and still keeps the moving smoke and keeps all the separate gate weave. What I did here actually is stabilize it separately, but I put the tracker here, which is part of the matte painting. So I made sure the matte painting part was stable, whereas the separate movement of the live action plate was kept. So at this point, what we have is the static matte painting with the moving live action plate. But if I zoom in here and maybe brighten this up a little bit, you can see this area especially has some heavy dirt on there. So what I do here is I again use my clean plate for just this area, but I did a tracker here, and I tracked 4 points on this area, and I did a corner pin transform so that while I'm using this clean plate for this area, it actually has all the movement of the original live action plate. Then the next thing was I did a Luminance Key. You can see here in the alpha. The alpha channel basically tells the program what should be see-through and what shouldn't. So what's black is see-through, what's white is opaque, and everything in between is partially opaque. So I created this Luminance Key to create this alpha channel. Then I used this Roto node to separate only the area that I want to use here. And when you look here, what the pre-mold node does, in very basic terms, it multiplies the RGB data by the alpha channel. So wherever there is black, it multiplies it by 0, so all that disappears. So when I merge these two together here, so I have this, and I have this, and this merge node merges them together. And because this is pre-multiplied, it only shows up in the area where there's alpha higher than 0. So now I put this part over there, then I put this part over my plate, and as you can see, thanks to the corner pin, it's got all the gate weave still in it. And I put this over my previous step, and this helped get rid of all the dirt in that area. Now the next step is just this ship. Again, it's I've got a mask here that creates an alpha channel like this, and when I pre-multiply this, all I have left is this area of the ship, and I put this over my matte painting so that we have the motion of the smoke coming out of the X-wing. And the next step is, let's go a little further in the shot so we have the birds in there. As you can see, of course, when I switch back to the 35mm here, the painting is now covering the birds here, okay? So what I have to do is rotoscope the birds, and I use the raw plate that is denoised, stabilized, color corrected, the same as my cleaned version. So I can now just draw these masks around those birds, and here merge them over my clean plate. So here I had to animate these masks frame by frame to get those birds back in the frame. And I had to do it in the whole shot because, like I already showed you, the dust busting and denoising actually removed those birds nearly completely in some frames. So I'm putting them in from the raw version untouched. This, of course, creates another problem, and that is that there's a lot of dirt left on the birds. So we'll have to deal with that later. Now the next step I did here was I used this roto paint to get rid of these scratches that were left after the automatic cleanup, and basically I just painted those areas in from other frames. Then I'm using this O-flow node, which basically slows the footage down to about half the speed. Let's have a look at it somewhere with the birds. You'll get a better idea, and you can see it blends the frames so that you get smooth motion. This does a fairly simple frame blending, but that's all I needed here. And what I used this for was to restore these missing frames. I told you in the last video that because this is the beginning of the reel, that is the part that gets handled the most by the projectionist, which is why this shot is so goddamn dirty, and also why it's missing the first few frames, because those were so damaged that they just cut them off. So in order to restore these missing frames, I slowed the shot down to half, then offset it, and then I did this dissolve so that there's a dissolve over several frames back into the original footage before the birds appear. Okay, so now this shot is nearly finished, but there's still one important step that needs to be taken, and that is the manual cleanup. You can see there's a lot of dirt on and around these birds where I put them back in from the raw plate. And also on the last frame there was a glue frame, which the dust busting tried to deal with but couldn't quite do it. So I'm gonna have to fix that manually as well. So that's what I'm doing here with these paint nodes. And again, what I do here, I use several sources. I use the clean plate that I made to paint out the dirt around the birds. And then I'm also using the other 35mm source, and I'm only using tiny little elements from this. For example, here, the first 35mm source on this frame has a big blob that covers part of the wing. Here, because I use a mask, it's only visible on the wing. And here I use the other 35mm source to restore that wing on this frame. But most of the dirt I removed either by using clone brush and cloning from areas around the dirt, or painting in detail from different frames. And finally, I copied this tracker, which I used to further stabilize the matte painting part of the image, because I needed this ship not to shake over the static background. And I reversed it here, and I'm using it to put back some of that original shake. Then I sharpen it a little bit, add back some grain, because of course we removed far too much grain in the degraining process, which it's much easier to work with a cleaned plate, but then at the end you need to put some grain back. Then a transform node to zoom the shot in to get rid of these edges, the frame, and finally a crop node to crop it to the proper size. Now we can have a look at this, which is a contact sheet of the 4 different versions we have here. So here we have the first 35mm source, the second 35mm source, the Blu-ray, and here is our finished shot. So there you have it, that's how it's done. This was one of the more complicated shots because of how much damage there was on the 35mm versions due to it being the first shot of a reel, and also because the Blu-ray version looks so different for this shot that it was practically unusable. So I had to really restore everything from the 35mm. I'm planning more of these videos down the line, and next time I'll show you something where I'm actually combining the Blu-ray with the 35mm footage, so you can see how that's done. Okay, that's it for today. Thanks for watching, and may the Schwartz be with you.